The heat rose off the road in waves. She had been riding for 3 days. 3 days of blistered hands, aching legs, and a face that had to stay calm, stay pleasant, stay completely unremarkable at every crossroads and every checkpoint and every small French town where German soldiers stood with rifles and looked hard at everyone who passed. 500 kilometers through the heart of Nazi-occupied France. Alone on a bicycle, her papers were forged. Her cover story was rehearsed. Her face gave nothing away. And in every town she smiled at the soldiers, answered their questions in perfect French, and then climbed back onto that bicycle and kept riding, because lives depended on her getting through. Because without her, 7,000 men had no weapons, no supplies, and no way to fight. And because the Gestapo had been hunting her for years, and she had survived this long by never, not once, letting them see her sweat. Her name was Nancy Wake. And at the height of the war in occupied France, the Germans had placed a bounty of 5 million francs on her head. 5 million francs, enough to make a man wealthy for the rest of his life. Standing orders from German intelligence to every agent, every informer, every collaborator in France: find her, report her, stop her by whatever means necessary. They never managed it. They gave her a name: Die Weiße Maus, the white mouse, because she vanished. Every time they thought they had her, every time the net tightened, she disappeared into the city, into the crowd, into the countryside. She slipped through their fingers so many times that she became something of an embarrassment to the entire German intelligence apparatus in France. She hated the name. Mice were small, mice were frightened. Mice ran, Nancy Wake did not run. She moved, she planned, she fought back. And on that summer road in 1944 she was not running from anyone. She was riding towards something. What that something was and what it had cost her to get to that moment on that bicycle is a story about courage that most people have never fully heard. It begins far from France, on the other side of the world. Nancy Grace Augusta Wake came into the world in Wellington, New Zealand in 1912. She was the youngest of 6 children, and her early life was shaped by absence. Her father left when she was still small. He went to America and sent nothing back, not money, not letters, not explanation. Her mother moved the family to Sydney, Australia, and they survived. They were not comfortable. They managed. Nancy left home at 16 with almost nothing and a restlessness she could not have named precisely, but that would define everything she would become. She worked where she could. She saved what she could. And slowly, carefully, painfully, she accumulated and looked at what human beings were capable of doing to other human beings. And something settled inside her, quiet and permanent as bedrock. She made no announcement. She wrote no proclamation. She simply decided, standing there on that Vienna pavement, that this was the thing she would spend her life opposing. That if the world was going to produce this, produce people capable of this, systems designed to enable this, then she was going to be on the other side of it. She could not have known what that decision would ultimately demand of her. She moved to Paris. She was good at the life there. She was witty and sharp and charming in a way that opened doors, and she had the journalist's gift for reading rooms and reading people. She wrote, she reported, she travelled. In 1936 in Marseille, at a dinner party in a city built on warmth and noise and enormous pleasure, she met Henry Fiocca. Henry was exactly the kind of man Marseille produced and admired. He was wealthy, easy in his wealth, generous with it, and absolutely, completely enchanted by Nancy from the moment he saw her. Their courtship was brief in the way that certain things are brief because they are already inevitable. They married in November 1939. By then, Germany had invaded Poland. The war had begun, but France was not yet occupied, and for a few more months the life they had built in Marseille continued. They had their house, their friends, their future. They had what felt in retrospect like the last of a world. Germany invaded France in May 1940. Paris fell 6 weeks later. By late June, a French government had signed an armistice. The occupiers moved in and the rules of life in France changed overnight. The swastika appeared over government buildings. Soldiers filled the cafes. Collaborators found opportunity in the new order. Nancy Wake found something else. She began quietly. She drove ambulances for relief operations. She helped displaced people find passage south. She used Henry's wealth, his connections, and his absolute unquestioning support for whatever she needed. He knew what she was doing. He helped where he could. He understood her in the way that matters most. He understood what she was made of. By 1942, she was a central figure in one of the most important escape networks in southern France, Allied airmen whose planes had been shot down over occupied territory. Soldiers separated from their units in the chaos of the French defeat, men who needed false papers, safe houses, guides through the mountains, and enough silence from enough people to make it to neutral Spain. She moved them. She organized. She bribed, bargained, planned, and personally escorted people through checkpoints that had no margin for error. Hundreds of Allied servicemen crossed into Spain through her network. Hundreds of men came home to their families who might otherwise have spent the rest of the war in a German prison camp, or not come home at all. The Gestapo took notice. They began building a file. A woman, a foreigner, connected to resistance circuits across the south of France. Impossible to locate, impossible to pin down. Every time they placed a watching agent near someone in her circle, the agent found nothing or vanished entirely. Every time they thought they had a name, a location, a meeting, she was already somewhere else. The name appeared in their intelligence reports, Die Weiss Maus. She was briefly amused by it, she would later say. Then she was not, because the name meant something serious. It meant she was known, it meant they were looking, and it meant that the window for survival was getting smaller with every week that passed. By late 1942, the network was unraveling. Arrests were happening. Friends and colleagues were disappearing into Gestapo custody. She knew what happened during interrogations. She knew what people were asked. She knew that every person taken knew her name and had been trained not to use it, but she also understood that training and reality become very different things when the pain becomes severe enough. She had to leave France. Henry told her to go. He was not afraid for himself, or if he was, he did not show it. He told her that she was the target, that as long as she stayed, she was a danger to everyone around her, and that she had to get out. She made multiple attempts to cross the Pyrenees, each one turned back by weather, by misfortune, by German patrols in the mountain passes. Finally, in the winter of 1942 to 1943, guided by smugglers through the high ground, she made it. The Pyrenees in winter are not kind to travelers. She arrived in Spain in a state that her body took weeks to recover from. She made it to England in early 1943. She was exhausted, separated from her husband, and immediately, absolutely certain that she needed to go back. The Special Operations Executive, Churchill's secret army, the organization built to arm and direct resistance movements across occupied Europe, recognized what they had in Nancy Wake. Someone who already knew occupied France at a level that could not be taught, who spoke the language without accent, who had demonstrated under conditions that broke most people a quality of nerve that could not be manufactured in training. They recruited her, trained her in weapons, explosives, radio operation, close combat, and the precise, lethal art of working behind enemy lines without being caught. The men who trained alongside her remembered her for the rest of their lives. She was, they said, something else entirely. In April 1944, she stepped out of an aircraft over the mountains of central France. Her parachute opened in the dark above a country that was still occupied, still dangerous, and that she had been trying to get back to for over a year. She landed in the Auvergne, and immediately found herself in a situation that required everything she had. The Maquis fighters, the French resistance cells operating in the forests and highlands of central France, were preparing for what everyone knew was coming: the Allied invasion, the final push. But they were underfed, poorly supplied, disorganized across dozens of separate cells, and in some cases deeply skeptical about taking direction from a woman dropped in from London who wanted to tell seasoned fighters how to operate. Nancy Wake spent no time being troubled by skepticism. She ran with them in the mornings. She drank with them at night. She trained with them and challenged them and outshot men who had spent years in the countryside with rifles. When a Maquis commander dismissed her, she did not argue. She demonstrated, again and again in the only language that mattered, that she was exactly what she had been sent to be. Their respect was not given. It was earned, over weeks of proving herself in conditions that were not theoretical. She was also capable of things that the men who worked alongside her would never forget. During one raid on a German-held position, a sentry threatened to raise the alarm. There was no time for hesitation, no margin for a sound. Nancy Wake had been trained for exactly this moment. She killed the man quickly, silently, with her hands. Those who were there later recalled how composed she was in the aftermath. It had been necessary. She had done it. They moved on. This was the reality of the work. Not romantic, not the clean drama of a motion picture, the hard, grinding, merciless business of fighting an occupation that would show no mercy to anyone it caught. By the spring of 1944, she was coordinating and effectively commanding more than 7,000 Maquis fighters across the Auvergne region. Ambushes on German convoys, destruction of bridges and supply lines. Targeted operations that tied down German forces in the Central Highlands at exactly the moment those forces were desperately needed elsewhere. And then the radio went dark. The network's primary radio operator had been killed. Without radio contact with London, there were no supply drops. Without supply drops, no weapons, no explosives, no ammunition. Without those things, 7,000 men waiting for an invasion were dangerously exposed. Nancy Wake got on a bicycle, 500 kilometers. For 3 days, through a country where her face was on wanted posters and 5 million francs awaited whoever delivered her to the Gestapo. Checkpoint after checkpoint, town after town, soldiers with questions to which she had rehearsed answers, a face that gave nothing away, a heartbeat she willed into steadiness through sheer force of the will that had always been her most powerful weapon. She found a radio operator. She transmitted the necessary codes. She got back on the bicycle and rode back. She arrived at the camp with torn hands and legs that could barely bend, and the supply drops resumed within days. This is the moment that people remember most often when they talk about Nancy Wake. The 500 kilometers, the checkpoints, the audacity of it. And it is extraordinary, genuinely extraordinary, what she did on that bicycle. But there is something else she carried on that road that most accounts do not dwell on long enough. She had not heard from Henry in months. The network that had once passed messages between them was gone. The people who might have known something were scattered or arrested or silent. She had left France without knowing what would happen to him, and she had been back in France for weeks now, surrounded by the noise and urgency of command. And Henry was somewhere on the other side of all of it. She rode those 500 kilometers without knowing. When D-Day came in June 1944, and the Allied armies began fighting their way inland from the beaches of Normandy, the Maquis fighters of the Auvergne were ready. They harassed German units moving to reinforce the front. They disrupted supply convoys. They held ground and cleared positions, and contributed at every turn to the great, costly, grinding work of liberation. The war in Europe ended in May 1945. Nancy Wake had survived. She went back to Marseille looking for Henry. She found people who had known him, and they told her what she had feared somewhere in the part of herself she had kept locked away through all of it. The Gestapo had taken Henry Fiocca not long after she escaped over the Pyrenees. They had questioned him. The interrogations were prolonged and they were not gentle, and Henry Fiocca knew, better than most men in that situation, exactly what was being asked of him and what refusing to answer would eventually mean. He told them nothing, not her location, not the names of her contacts, not the routes, the safe houses, the couriers, the codes. He protected every person he knew about, with the only currency he had left, his willingness to endure what they were doing to him for as long as it took. Henry Fiocca was executed by the Gestapo in 1943. He went to his death without betraying a single name. Nancy Wake received the George Medal from Britain, the Médaille de la Résistance from France, the Croix de Guerre 3 times, and the Medal of Freedom from the United States. She was decorated by governments, celebrated by historians, and interviewed by journalists for decades. She lived a long life, eventually settling in London, and she died in 2011, 98 years old and to the very end entirely herself, but she never went back to live in France. She said more than once that the price of the work was not the danger. She had made her peace with danger long before she ever stood in an aircraft door over the dark Auvergne. The price was Henry. The price was the life they would have had together. The price was every morning in Marseille that never happened, and every quiet year that the war consumed before she could get back to reach for it. This is the part of the story that the medals do not capture. The specific human weight of what it costs to choose courage, not once, not in a single dramatic moment, but again and again across years in the dark without any certainty about what will be left when it is finally over. Nancy Wake looked away from nothing. Not from the Vienna Street in 1933, not from the fall of the country she had made her home, not from the mountains in winter, not from the checkpoints on the long road south, not from the aircraft door at night over occupied France, not from the sentry in the dark, not from the hollow conversation in Marseille that told her Henry was gone. She looked at all of it, and she kept moving. The Gestapo called her the White Mouse. They believed she was small and frightened and that eventually she would run out of places to hide. They were wrong about all of it. She was not small, she was not running, and she was not the kind of woman who runs out of places to go. She was the kind of woman who gets on a bicycle and rides 500 kilometers through the middle of the enemy's country because 7,000 men need her to, and there is simply no one else to do it. She was the kind of woman who jumps out of an airplane into the dark over a country that wants to arrest and kill her because the work is not finished and someone has to finish it. She was the kind of woman who comes home after the war is won and looks for the man she loves and learns what her freedom cost him and finds a way to keep living. the greatest heroes of history are often the ones we almost miss entirely. The ones who worked in shadows, who left quietly, who asked for nothing except that the thing they believed in should survive. Freedom is not delivered by the powerful to the grateful. It is built inch by inch, kilometer by kilometer, checkpoint by checkpoint, by people who decide, standing in front of something they cannot look away from, that the cost of silence is greater than the cost of standing up. Nancy Wake made that decision on a Vienna pavement in 1933. She spent the next 12 years proving she meant every word of it. And somewhere on a long French road in the burning summer of 1944, there is a woman on a bicycle, in the heat with everything on the line, with 5 million francs worth of enemies on every side, and the man she loves somewhere on the other side of silence. And she does not stop. She never stops.